That morning, the city of Greenview woke up under gentle sunlight, with the first rays of the day filtering through the shady trees along the small streets. This was a peaceful neighborhood where neatly lined houses were surrounded by lush green lawns and tidy white fences. The chirping of birds echoed like a soothing background melody, and everything seemed tranquil, just like every other day in Greenview. Ethan Cole, a recycling truck driver, began his early morning shift. He was familiar with every nook and cranny of this neighborhood after years of work, where he not only collected waste but also engaged in friendly conversations with the residents, building close relationships. But today, something felt different. Ethan had just been promoted to team leader, a proud achievement after years of hard work. However, his first day in the new role was not going smoothly. His close colleague had to take an unexpected leave due to illness, leaving Ethan with double the usual workload. Despite this, he remained optimistic and determined to complete his tasks to the best of his ability. As the truck slowly rolled through the familiar streets, Ethan felt the morning's serenity. Yet inside, he sensed a bit of pressure from the workload ahead and the absence of a companion. Little did he know that today would lead him into a situation where his courage, compassion, and determination would be tested more than ever. Ethan approached the home of a family he often encountered on his route, Anna, a single mother, and her young daughter Sophie. On previous visits, Anna and Sophie would often wave to him, sometimes even offering a refreshing glass of water on hot summer days. But today, as Ethan drew closer, something was different. Ethan stopped his truck in front of house number 14, where Anna and her little daughter Sophie lived. This was one of the families he cherished the most in the neighborhood. Anna, a single mother, always appeared with a radiant smile despite life's challenges. Sophie, a 6-year-old girl with big, bright eyes, would often run out to wave at Ethan whenever he came by. But this morning, everything seemed unusual. As Ethan's truck neared, he saw Anna and Sophie stepping out of an old car parked in front of the house. However, instead of the familiar smiles and warm greetings, both quickly headed inside with a hurried demeanor. Sophie, who was usually brimming with energy and joy, now kept her head down, avoiding eye contact. Anna, the composed and resilient woman, looked exhausted, as if carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders. Ethan felt that something was wrong. "Good morning, Anna," Ethan called out in a friendly tone, hoping for the familiar response. But Anna only replied absent-mindedly, "Good morning." Her voice was so soft he could barely hear it. She pulled Sophie into the house, and the door quickly shut behind them. There was something in Anna's eyes that left Ethan unsettled. It wasn't the usual hurriedness he had seen in people rushing to work. Instead, it was worry, perhaps even fear. Sophie was unusually quiet as well, not even glancing back at him. Ethan sat silently in the driver's seat, his hands still on the steering wheel. He tried to convince himself that maybe they were just having a bad morning. Everyone has their stressful moments, he told himself, but the uneasy feeling lingered. As he continued his work, Ethan's mind kept returning to the image of Anna and Sophie. What could possibly have made them, two people who were always so cheerful and warm, act so cold and withdrawn? He didn't know that this gut feeling would soon lead him into a series of events that would change his life and save two precious lives. Ethan resumed his job, activating the truck's crane to lift the recycling bin in front of Anna's house. But as the bin was lifted, he noticed something unusual. The trash bags inside didn't look like what he normally saw from this house. He stopped and bent down to take a closer look. What he saw left him surprised. The bags were filled with brand new items, children's toys, books, clean clothes, and even a school uniform with the tag still attached. All of them had been hastily stuffed into the trash bags. "That's strange," Ethan murmured to himself. Anna wasn't the type to waste things like this. He recalled how she had always carefully packed old items to donate rather than throw away anything still useful. Looking more closely, he noticed the bags had been tied very carelessly, as though someone had hurriedly stuffed the items inside, not wanting them to be noticed. The feeling of suspicion grew stronger in Ethan's mind. What's going on here? He wondered, his eyes fixed on the trash bags. Determined not to ignore this oddity, Ethan picked up the bag and walked up the path leading to Anna's front door. He hesitated before knocking and then waited for a few moments. There was no answer. He knocked again, louder this time. Finally, the door opened slightly, and Anna appeared. But she didn't look like the woman he usually knew. Her face was pale, her eyes sunken with dark circles as though she hadn't slept. Her hair, usually neatly tied back, was disheveled, and her exhausted demeanor made Ethan acutely aware of her anxiety. "Anna, I'm sorry to bother you," Ethan began gently, "but I noticed these items in the trash. They're so new, I thought maybe you'd prefer to donate them instead of throwing them away." Anna glanced at the bag in Ethan's hand and quickly shook her head. "No need, Ethan. I threw them out because I don't need them anymore." But Ethan started to say, but Anna interrupted him. "Really, it's fine. Thank you, but please just throw them away." Her voice was tense. She began to close the door, but Ethan made one last attempt. "If you'd like, I can take these to the charity center. They could really help a lot of people." "No need." Anna cut him off abruptly, her voice sharper this time. "Thank you, but this is none of your concern." Ethan stepped back, confused. The door slammed shut in front of him, leaving an unsettling silence. Yet the image of Anna, her weary face, her evasive demeanor, and the strange bag in the trash remained vivid in his mind. Ethan returned to his truck, but the unease in his chest didn't fade. Something was very wrong here, and his instincts told him this story wasn't over. Just as he started the truck to continue his route, he suddenly heard hurried footsteps behind him, small, frantic footsteps, as if someone was trying to escape. Before he could turn around, a trembling voice, filled with desperation, called out, "Mr. Ethan, please help me." He immediately jumped out of the truck, a chill running down his spine. Standing in front of him was Sophie, the little girl he knew as cheerful and carefree, now trembling, her small frame curled in fear. Sophie's big round eyes were red and swollen, tears streaming down her dirt-streaked cheeks. Her tiny hands clung tightly to Ethan's sleeve as if holding on to her last glimmer of hope. Ethan knelt down, his face etched with concern. Gently placing a reassuring hand on Sophie's shoulder, he spoke in a calm yet serious tone. "Sophie, what's wrong? Are you okay? Tell me." The little girl shook her head, her lips quivering as she struggled to speak through sobs. My mom needs help." Sophie paused, taking a deep, shaky breath for courage, then burst into tears. "He's going to hurt her. Please, don't let him take my mom away." Her words pierced Ethan's heart like a dagger. The phrase he immediately raised a flurry of questions in his mind. Who was he? Why was Sophie so terrified? What was really happening inside the house that seemed so peaceful just hours ago? Ethan fought to stay calm. He knelt to Sophie's eye level, gently squeezing her shoulders for reassurance. "Sophie, listen to me," he said, his voice firm yet warm. "Who is he? I need to know what's going on so I can help you and your mom." Before Sophie could respond, a loud noise came from the house, the sound of a door slamming open, followed by heavy footsteps. A loud, angry voice shattered the silence. "Sophie, what are you doing out there?" Ethan looked up to see a large man stepping out of the door. He appeared to be in his early 40s, with a burly build and an expression filled with fury. His eyes glinted with anger, and there wasn't a shred of calm in his demeanor. Sophie instantly stepped back, her tiny hands gripping Ethan's shirt even tighter. She trembled, as if just one step toward the man would cause her to collapse. Ethan stood up, his protective instincts kicking in. He placed a hand gently behind Sophie, as if to shield her from the man. His eyes stayed locked on the stranger, and he didn't need to ask to know that this was the he Sophie was so afraid of. The man narrowed his eyes at Ethan, his voice sharp and accusatory. "Who are you? What are you doing here? Get away from my daughter now." Sophie shook her head, hiding behind Ethan. Her trembling voice broke through the tense air. "He's not my dad. Don't let him take my mom, Mr. Ethan, please." Ethan turned back to Sophie, her tear-filled eyes pleading with him. His heart raced, a sense of urgency enveloping him. He didn't know what was about to happen, but one thing was clear: Sophie and her mother needed him more than ever. As Ethan tried to comfort Sophie, the front door slammed open again with a force that startled them both. A large man stormed out, his heavy steps thudding toward them. It was David, Sophie's stepfather. His face was flushed red, a clear sign of uncontrollable anger. His eyes burned with a menacing glare. The suit he wore was wrinkled and disheveled, as if he had been lying on the couch all night. The stench of alcohol wafted off him in the breeze, so strong that it made Ethan recoil slightly in disgust. David stopped in the front yard, pointing directly at Ethan, his voice booming with anger. "What the hell are you doing with my daughter?" Ethan took a deep breath to steady himself, but his protective instincts flared immediately. He turned, stepping forward to shield Sophie behind him, ensuring the little girl was safely out of the angry man's reach. Sophie clung tightly to Ethan's shirt, her small body trembling uncontrollably. "I didn't do anything," Ethan replied, his tone calm but unwavering. "Sophie came to me because she needed help. She's terrified." David narrowed his eyes, a faint, mocking smile curling on his lips, not one of friendliness but of disdain mixed with smugness. "Help," he sneered, dragging the word out sarcastically. "What could a garbage man like you possibly do to help? Go back to your filthy job and stay out of my family's business." David's words cut like a knife, stabbing at Ethan's pride. But Ethan didn't respond immediately. He knew he needed to remain calm, not just for himself but for Sophie, who was clinging to him as her last refuge. Swallowing the anger rising in his chest, Ethan kept his steady gaze locked on David. "I don't know what's going on in this house," Ethan said slowly but firmly, "but I won't ignore a child who's scared, especially when she's begging for help." David took a step closer, stopping just a few feet from Ethan. The stench of alcohol was overwhelming, forcing Ethan to hold back his discomfort. David leaned in slightly, his eyes sharp and threatening, his voice lowering to a menacing tone. "Listen, pal. If you don't get off my property right now, I'll call the cops. And I'll make sure you lose your job. Do you understand? I have the power to make that happen." David paused, waiting for Ethan's reaction. But instead of retreating, Ethan stood his ground, his expression growing even more resolute. He knew David's threats weren't empty, and losing his job could very well become a reality. But as he glanced back at Sophie, her tear-streaked face filled with terror, Ethan knew he couldn't walk away. Ethan responded, his voice low but steady. "If you want to call the cops, go ahead. But know this, I'll call them too. And I'll tell them about the fear I see in Sophie, and the way you're treating her." David faltered for a moment, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his eyes, as if a part of him knew Ethan was telling the truth. But almost instantly he masked it with a smirk. "Fine," David said, his voice wavering slightly. "Let's see who the cops believe, a successful businessman like me, or a garbage man like you." David's laugh was cold, but Ethan didn't let the words faze him. Taking out his phone, Ethan held it firmly and said with conviction, "I'm not here to argue with you, but I am calling the police. They'll get to the bottom of this." Ethan's words heightened the tension to its breaking point. For a moment David stood frozen, his fists clenched tightly at his sides, his eyes blazing with fury. Sophie clung even tighter to Ethan, her tiny hands trembling as they gripped his shirt like her only lifeline. Sophie looked up, her red, tear-filled eyes full of panic. Her voice, weak but filled with raw emotion, broke through in halting sobs. "Don't let him take my mom. He's a bad man. My mom will get hurt." In the distance, the sound of police sirens began to wail, growing louder with each passing second. Relief and apprehension washed over Ethan simultaneously. The confrontation was nearing its climax, and whatever came next would change everything. David continued to hurl his rage at Ethan, his voice sharp and filled with threats. His words felt like verbal punches, attempting to force Ethan to back down. But while David ranted, Sophie's grip on Ethan only tightened, her trembling body pressing against his back, as if drawing strength from his presence. Ethan glanced down at Sophie, his resolve hardening. No matter what, he would not let her down. Those words felt like a heavy weight pressing on Ethan's chest. He couldn't ignore Sophie's plea. This wasn't a misunderstanding, nor just a typical family argument. It was raw truth, a child standing before him, begging him with all her desperation. Ethan turned back to face David, his gaze now steady and unwavering. He knew he couldn't turn away or abandon Sophie and her mother in this situation. Taking a deep breath, he spoke firmly and resolutely. "All right, call the police if you want. But I will call them too. And I'll report what I've seen, Sophie's fear, and what I suspect is happening in your house." Ethan's words sliced through the tense air like a knife. For a moment, David froze. His eyes briefly flickered with uncertainty, as though realizing the situation was spiraling out of his control. But he quickly masked his fear with a mocking smirk. "Go ahead," he sneered, trying to sound calm. "Let's see who they believe, a successful businessman like me or a garbage man like you." Ethan didn't reply. There was no point in arguing further with this man. Instead, he quickly pulled his phone from his pocket, his fingers trembling slightly as he dialed 911. His voice, though a bit shaky, remained clear and composed as he spoke to the dispatcher. "I need police at this address immediately. A child is in danger and I suspect domestic violence." David stood there, glaring at Ethan with eyes full of fury, as though trying to burn him with his gaze. He took a step forward, his lips curling into a manic snarl. "Who the hell do you think you are?" David roared. "I'll make you regret sticking your nose into my business." Before David could do anything more, the unmistakable sound of police sirens echoed in the distance, shattering the tense silence of the neighborhood. David froze, his body stiffening. He turned his head toward the flashing red and blue lights rapidly approaching. His smug grin faded, replaced by a pale and panicked expression. Ethan stood his ground, his eyes locked on David. Beside him, Sophie clung tightly to his shirt, her tiny body still trembling, but her eyes now showed a glimmer of hope. Ethan leaned down slightly and whispered to her reassuringly, "It's okay, Sophie. The police will help your mom." When the police car screeched to a halt in front of the house, Ethan stood firm, a protective barrier between Sophie and the danger. For the first time that day, he felt he had done the right thing. Whatever happened next, he knew one thing for certain: he wouldn't let Sophie and her mother endure more suffering. As Ethan kept Sophie close, the front door of the house suddenly burst open. David stormed out, dragging Anna roughly behind him. The sight of Anna stopped Ethan cold. Her face was covered in bruises, her eyes swollen, and her breathing labored. She struggled to break free, but her weak attempts were no match for David's brute force. "Stay still, Anna," David bellowed, shoving her into the back seat of the car parked outside. The battered, old vehicle with its door ajar looked ready to carry out David's escape plan. Anna fell onto the seat, wincing in pain but too drained to resist. Ethan couldn't stand by any longer. In a split-second decision, he stepped in front of the car, blocking its path. "What the hell are you doing?" David screamed, slamming his fists on the steering wheel. "Get out of the way, you useless idiot, or I'll run you over." Ethan didn't budge. He stood firm, his eyes meeting David's with unshakable determination. "I'm not letting you take her. The police are here, and you're not getting away." David roared inside the car, his eyes darting around like a cornered animal. He looked for another way to escape but found none. The sirens grew louder, and within moments 2 police cars arrived, their flashing lights illuminating the quiet street. Officers quickly exited their vehicles, surrounding the scene with weapons drawn. "Hands up. Step out of the vehicle immediately," one officer commanded through a loudspeaker, his voice firm and authoritative. David, who had tried to maintain his composure, now began to panic. He opened the car door and stepped out, but not to surrender. He tried to slip behind the car to make a run for it. However, within seconds, the officers tackled him to the ground, pinning him down as they cuffed his hands. "Let me explain. This is all just a misunderstanding," David shouted, but no one listened. The officers hauled him to his feet and escorted him to the patrol car. Ethan watched as David was driven away, his grip on Sophie steady. The little girl looked up at him, her tear-streaked face now showing a glimmer of relief. Ethan knew the fight wasn't over, but in that moment he felt a small victory. He had stood his ground, and Sophie and her mother were finally safe. Ethan approached one of the officers, his voice still trembling with emotion but clear as he recounted everything that had happened, from Sophie's fear and Anna's injuries to David's attempt to escape. "Thank you," the officer said after listening. "Your testimony will be crucial in bringing him to justice." Meanwhile, a medical team arrived to assess Anna's condition. She was carefully helped out of the car by paramedics, and Ethan noticed a fleeting expression of relief cross her bruised face as she spotted Sophie. "Mom," Sophie cried, running to her mother. The weak Anna opened her arms wide and embraced her daughter. The two clung to each other, tears streaming down their faces, not of fear this time, but of comfort in being reunited. Ethan stepped back, giving them space for their moment of reunion. His heart felt lighter seeing them safe. Anna was being attended to by the medical team, and Sophie stayed close by her mother's side, not letting go for even a moment. An officer approached Ethan, placing a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "You did the right thing today. Without you, this could have ended much worse. We'll need more of your testimony at the station, but for now, know that you've saved their lives." Ethan nodded, a strange sense of peace washing over him. He wasn't a hero, just an ordinary garbage truck driver. But today he had done something extraordinary, and that was enough to make him proud. After helping the police complete the report and ensuring Anna and Sophie were safe, Ethan returned to his recycling truck. He knew his morning route had been seriously disrupted, and there was still unfinished work. But instead of feeling stressed, he felt an unusual calm. He had done the right thing. Sitting in his truck, Ethan pulled out his phone and called his company to report the delay. He took a deep breath as the line connected. "Hi, this is Ethan. I'm sorry I couldn't complete the route this morning. I encountered an emergency." Ethan explained the situation, bracing himself for criticism or even the possibility of losing his job. But he was surprised to hear his manager, Susan, respond in a steady, understanding tone. "Ethan, I just got a call from one of the officers in Greenview," Susan said. "They told me what you did this morning. I want you to know that the company fully supports your actions. You didn't just do the right thing, you saved 2 lives. We're incredibly proud of you." Susan's words stunned Ethan, but also filled his heart with warmth. "Thank you, ma'am," he replied, his voice heavy with emotion. "I just did what I thought was right." "And that's what makes you a team member we're proud to have," Susan said. "Take the rest of the day off to recover. We'll talk more later, but know that your job is secure." Ethan ended the call, feeling as though a heavy burden had been lifted. His job was safe, and more importantly, he had acted with integrity. That afternoon, Ethan returned to the police station to finalize the paperwork. There, he saw Anna and Sophie again. Anna had received medical care and looked healthier, though the bruises on her face were still visible. Sophie ran to him the moment she saw him, wrapping her small arms tightly around him. "Mr. Ethan, you're my hero," Sophie exclaimed, her eyes shining with joy and admiration. Ethan smiled, kneeling down to gently ruffle her hair. "I just did what I had to do, Sophie. You're the real hero. You were so brave and saved your mom." Anna approached, her eyes red from emotion. "Ethan, I don't know how to thank you. If it weren't for you, I can't imagine what would have happened to me and Sophie. You saved our lives." Ethan shook his head modestly. "You don't have to thank me. I just did what anyone should do. You and Sophie deserve to be safe." As Anna and Sophie left the station under the protection of the authorities, Ethan watched them walk away, feeling an overwhelming sense of fulfillment. For a day that had begun like any other, it had ended in a way he would never forget. Ethan humbly shook his head. "I just did what I thought was right. But I'm glad you and Sophie are safe." Anna smiled, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Thank you from the bottom of my heart. Sophie and I owe you our lives." Before leaving, Anna hesitated and added, "Once things settle down, I'd like to invite you over for dinner to properly thank you. You've done so much for us." Ethan looked slightly flustered but nodded. "I'd be happy to. But really, there's no need to thank me so much. The important thing is that you're both safe now." Anna smiled again, this time without the shadow of pain. Sophie held Ethan's hand tightly, her face lighting up with happiness. "Mr. Ethan, I want you to visit us, and I'll tell all my friends that you're a hero." Ethan chuckled, feeling a deep sense of relief. He realized that his actions had not only changed Anna and Sophie's lives, but also reminded him of the profound value of compassion and community responsibility. As he stepped out of the police station, the setting sun cast a warm glow on the road ahead. Ethan took a deep breath, a sense of pride swelling in his chest. Though the day had been tumultuous, he knew he had done the right thing, something he would always remember with pride. Despite his role as a simple recycling truck driver, Ethan understood that ordinary actions could create extraordinary change, and that was something he would cherish for the rest of his life. A story of courage. Nah, Ethan's story is a vivid testament to the power of bravery. In a moment of confronting the unexpected, he refused to ignore his instincts. Rather than choosing silence and continuing his routine, he chose to act, a decision rooted in listening to his intuition and a deep sense of responsibility. Ethan's courage wasn't just about calling the police or stepping in front of David's car. It was his ability to overcome the fear of consequences and stand up for what was right in a dangerous situation. From an ordinary recycling truck driver, he became a hero not through extraordinary strength, but through determination and courage. His actions also reflect the profound value of kindness. In a world where many might choose indifference to issues that don't directly concern them, Ethan chose the harder path. He not only fulfilled his work duties but also embraced his role in society, helping those in need, even when it was beyond the scope of his daily responsibilities. Ethan never sought thanks or recognition. What drove him was the desire to protect Sophie and Anna. His actions remind us that kindness, no matter how small, can lead to monumental change. This story also carries a powerful message about community solidarity. Ethan, though a recycling truck driver, demonstrated that everyone has a role in creating a better society. He wasn't a police officer or a doctor, but he acted for the benefit of others. Ethan's story encourages us to pay attention to unusual signs in our daily lives. A look, an odd action, or a quiet plea for help might be the signal of a larger story, and our attention could save someone's life. This is not just a tale of rescue, but a reminder that every individual, no matter their position, has the power to make a difference. Courage, kindness, and community awareness can transform ordinary actions into extraordinary deeds, just as Ethan did. Let's listen to our instincts, care for those around us, and be ready to act when needed. A little courage and compassion from you could change someone's life, just as Ethan forever changed the lives of Anna and Sophie.